Welcome to another episode of Just One More Fix. With me in this episode is Kurt, Lee, and Lacey.
Hey.
Hello. You can find us online at justonemorefix.com or on Twitter at justonemorefix. If you like us, head over to iTunes or to Google Play and give us a rating and a comment. In this episode, we're going to talk about archetypes and using them to build better NPCs. And now it's time to get our gaming fix. Welcome to Just One More Fix. Two quick announcements. If you guys have been listening to us, we review one role-playing game a week. Usually release that on Friday. And we are coming up on the end of the indie games that we commonly play play the most often. So if you guys have any requests, or if you are a game publisher of some kind or whatever, and you would like us to take a look at your game, just let us know. You can email me at james@justonemorefix.com, and we'd be more than happy to take a look at your game and review it if it works for us or whatever. So drop us a line, just james@justonemorefix.com. Second announcement is that we have finished our Twitter and Facebook contest for our Fiasco giveaway.
Woohoo!
And drum roll.
Whoa.
That was an intense drum roll.
Intense like this contest.
So on the Twitter side of things, I'm not sure what your real name is, but Creepy Kirk is the winner from Twitter.
Go Creepy.
And from
Kirk.
Facebook, it is, I hope I'm saying this right, Dahi Travaskas. So,
We Googled that.
yeah, we did Google how to pronounce your first name, so I hope we got it right. I will be contacting you on Twitter or Facebook, and so you should be hearing from me within the next couple days. And so we can get your addresses and contact information so we get those sent out to you. So congratulations to all those guys, and thanks to everybody who entered and helped us try to grow our online Twitter and Facebook communities. We're trying to get the word out there and share how awesome our ideas are about gaming. So
Feel free to continue to share and like our posts without any incentives. We do appreciate it.
right.
Because we're cool.
Ish.
All right, so with all that finished, we kind of mentioned already that we're going to talk about archetypes and as they relate to kind of like building the monomyth story, and we're kind of going to use this one to lead into the actual using the monomyth as a model for building your role-playing games and your campaigns and your stories.
Hey, James, for those people who don't know, could you review for us what the monomyth is?
So the monomyth is this theory that there is a common tale or of the hero's journey that goes across all kinds of different cultures, whether you're from a Western European culture or from like an Asian culture or anywhere essentially in any time period, whether that's ancient or more modern. And while at an anthropology level, it's kind of fallen out of favor, but I would argue that all the stories that we know and love follow this monomyth's journey. And we're going to try and see if we can't build better stories and games by following the monomyth storyline. So the archetypes that we're going to talk about today kind of very strongly tie into that monomyth idea. And so we want to kind of introduce these archetypes so when we kind of get to the monomyth part of things, that you guys will have a better understanding of kind of some of the things that we're talking about. So the monomyths, they come from Carl Jung. He's a occultist and psychologist, and
I think psychologist more known as.
Yeah, but he also had this universal subconscious thing, and that's actually kind of where the archetypes come from, is that they are presented in a lot of dreams and in a lot of stories, and that they fill these things, they fill certain roles and stories. So the first one is obviously hero. That's pretty clear. That's your character or the characters in the story. That makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
So after that, there's actually, I'll link them in the show notes. There's a couple real easy graphics to see them. There's 12 of them actually, it looks like. And after that would be the sage, which is a sort of wise, all-knowing person that imparts specific knowledge that the hero wouldn't have.
Like a Yoda.
Yeah, or Obi-Wan would be a good example of one, or Morpheus from the Matrix trilogy. Innocent, which is sort of a person that represents innocence and naivety and purity. There is the lover, which there's always some kind of love interest in a lot of monomyth stories. Like you think of the relationship between the weird one that starts off with Luke and Leia and then eventually evolves into Han and Leia.
It doesn't always have to be a romance kind of love either.
No, it can be a brotherly love.
The Disney movie Frozen, you have a sisterly sort of love that involves some sacrifice.
So yeah, Frozen is a good example of the sisterly love. There's lots of tales of brotherly love, or like I guess you could kind of put Sam in this a little bit with Sam and Frodo. There's some very much friendship there that is very, very close. Although I think this is implied more of like I don't know, maybe a little bit of a romantic love, maybe, because there's some other roles that a lot of those kind of allies, like Sam being a very close ally. It's very much there's a very close kinship between those two characters, but it's also he's more of an ally than he is an embodiment of brotherly love, I guess.
And you get the magician, of course. You get your classic. I guess your Yoda works there as well, but your Gandalfs and that sort of thing.
Right, those guys all fall under. Oh, I guess it is. Wow, it's kind of weird.
He is technically Yoda is a magician. He lifts the X-wing out of the swamp.
Right, right.
So I guess when you're talking about archetype, what differentiates your sage from your magician?
I suppose a sage is more of like the Dalai Lama, like the wise man without any supernatural powers,
But Morpheus has special powers.
Yeah, but I'd argue like they all do in that setting. So like some of these they're obviously kind of flexible, but like in Harry Potter, there's no magician because everybody's a magician. You know what I'm saying? So there's also the caregiver, which is they embody that the compassion, empathy. They're there to take care of the hero when they're broken and busted.
No, the elf in Lord of the Rings. What's her
Elrond?
name?
Galadriel.
Galadriel.
Yeah, when
Galadriel in Lord
right,
of
she
the
runs
Rings.
up and she heals Frodo after he's been poisoned by the Morgul blade. Is that what it was?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure you're talking about an entirely different elf. Galadriel rules in Lothlorien.
Oh yeah, no, I'm talking.
Arwen is
Oh,
the
no,
one that heals
sorry.
him.
I'm talking about Arwen. Yes,
And,
Arwen to me represents the caretaker. She also comes to Aragorn when he's near death as well.
Right.
She tends to show up when things are very, very desperate in a physical kind of way to bring characters back from the brink.
Galadriel comes to Frodo. Remember in the spider in Shelob's lair, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah,
That's
with the light. I would say she's almost more of a magician character.
So like, but like what I'm talking about with Arwen, there's a lot of these characters that kind of shift and move between what role they need to fill in the story. So like with Arwen, she is the lover with Aragorn, but she also fills this kind of caretaker role, which they kind of in a lot of ways kind of go hand in hand in some ways. You might say with the archetypal feminine healer kind, the
Florence Nightingale syndrome. Yeah, we're familiar with that.
Right.
Thanks.
There you go.
No. They can go hand in hand. It's not necessarily required that they
No, I'm
do.
not saying that they are, but they oftentimes do.
Just because you're one thing doesn't mean you can't also be another.
Right. No, I agree. And oftentimes as the story changes and things evolve, people shift from one role to another to fulfill certain roles within the story. So the Sovereign is a big one that happens in a lot of hero's journey stories where there's some kind of ruler, whether they're actually royal blood or not, but they have control over things, and they are the source of power and order, I guess you might say, whether that's good or bad order. We already mentioned the magician.
Citizen.
Oh, yeah.
Now I'm kind of curious as to the role of the citizen. I mean, how do I use that?
They're to kind of represent the ordinary world, like what is the world that the hero is leaving, to go on this journey. They're there to be like a placeholder for the mundane, essentially, like the real regular world that the hero is leaving to go on his journey from.
So do we have a good example of that in the story? I mean, is that as being more than just a background character? Like
I'd have to think.
What about in Captain America in the beginning with
Bucky?
With Bucky, he's pretty mundane. I mean, he's a soldier. He's kind of a stand-up guy, but he is the sort of stand-up guy who's just a citizen. He's joined up to.
I think he kind of fits into that a little bit. I agree. He's also kind of this ally figure, that kind of slides in there. He kind of fits a couple of those different things, But he does call back to the regular world that, at least in the first movie, he calls back to the real world, the regular world that the Captain America leaves. And then at various points in other movies, like Civil War, while he's not regular Bucky anymore, there's still references to what he used to be to kind of call back to the world that they were leaving. Like when they're getting off the plane at the end of Civil War to go in to stop the big bad guy from waking up the other super soldiers, they call back to a girl that he was dating or was chasing after or something to kind of remember that world that they left and the relationship that they had, that ordinary thing that they have clearly departed from now to this crazy big world that they're currently in. So then we have the creator, which is sort of like,
Well, did anybody see Heroes, the first season of Heroes?
Yeah.
There was actually an artist in that who, painted visions of the future.
Oh, right.
I mean, they actually were a creator of things. I mean, I suppose that could...
You're right. The Explorer, so they're a person like Christopher Columbus kind of a thing, the person that pushes the boundaries to go to new places. Heroes often feel like they kind of slide into this role a little bit.
A Golden Compass comes to mind, the book, at
very
least.
good, yeah. Jesters, which are there to kind of break tension, to ease the mood, to take, like, when things are crazy intense, what makes a lot of stories work is the rise and fall of the tension, and that is usually done with some kind of jester character, or sometimes it's called the trickster, where they characters like Pippin and Merry would be jesters or tricksters. In a lot of places, Ron from Harry Potter, and how he's so terribly incompetent at a lot of things that he does. And then the final one is the rebel, which kind of is very clear. They're the one that pushes the boundaries. They take big risks. They're all about them, like the individuality. A lot of times they kind of fall into being a leader because they are so going against the grain of whatever is currently happening in the story. So now we've kind of laid all those out. Like, do you guys think it would help to build your NPCs specifically with one archetype in mind?
Okay, so this is what I'm thinking. This is a great jumping off point, but absolutely do not stop here.
Oh, I don't.
No, but I would agree with you. This is a good place if you're not sure where to go. I'll be honest. I try to avoid the archetypes all the time, because what happens is if you're in a game that I'm doing then, and you see, oh, this is the citizen, or oh, this is this kind of character, and you will respond to them the same way every single time. One of the things that I like to use, Frank Chadwick back in 1989, if I can throw ourselves back here, wrote a game called Space 1889. And in Space 1889, there is an NPC motivation chart. And I used to love, and in point of fact, I still do use this. And it gives, he'd have you roll randomly, but I love just picking motivations from this list. And so, yes, I would say definitely you could use this, especially if you're new at doing this, as a jumping off point. But I certainly wouldn't use it as the be-all and end-all.
Well, no, and I think it's something that we talked about a little bit, where the characters can shift back and forth between different roles. But I think that, like, when you think of these classic stories and the stories that we love to watch and read, they all include these. And while I don't think that it works in a campaign setting where you have story after story where one guy is just the trickster and that's the only role that he ever fills, that's not compelling after the first few times. But when you lay out your story and you sort of plug your NPCs into these broadly painted, broadly brushed roles, that's the only thing that they can do, but that is what they're there to represent within the story.
No, and I think that's fantastic, but at the same time, I would put a twist in it. I've even toyed, and you're going to probably all roll your eyes at me with this one, but I even toyed with using the Myers-Briggs personality types for fleshing out the most important NPCs recently. While you can argue for its benefit or its bunk in real life, it could be it struck me as a very interesting way to choose a deep set of motivations for how the NPCs interact with the PCs in their world.
I think just using the archetypes, the characters would fall flat.
Well, what I'm saying, I don't disagree. When you have someone who is just the sage character, if they represent a larger role, if it's just a minor role where they're supposed to go get the answer or a clue to a riddle from the wise man on the mountain, then that makes sense that that's the only role that they fill, right? Mm-hmm. But in a lot of cases, if you think about characters like Severus Snape is an extremely strong character, right? And he slides back and forth. And he fits not an archetype, but a specific role in the story that we'll talk about probably in the next episode called Shapeshifter, where you never are sure of his loyalty. And he continues to shift back and forth, and you never
but at the end you find
truly
out he was a caregiver the entire time.
But that's what I'm saying is that like that's a great example of how people's full motivations don't always come to the forefront until the end of the story. And I think a lot of times that you can benefit a lot where if you have, that the function of this character in the story is to play the rebel. Now, he might have competing motivations and he might be a complex character, but what I think the archetypes are for is to show what his fundamental role is to show in the story. Like, what is his purpose in being there? And if his purpose is to challenge the order of everything, then then let him do that and funnel him into that. Now, it doesn't make him a one-dimensional character. He can still have all kinds of motivations and conflict and all this kind of stuff within inside of him. But fundamentally, his job is there to provide a challenge to the status quo so the heroes can see it. That's that role in that archetype.
Now, has anyone else here watched Sherlock, the BBC series?
I think I've watched the first
I've
two
seen
seasons.
one episode.
What?
I haven't watched it at all.
It's on my list to watch. It's on the to-do list.
Okay, so the rest of the civilized,
It's also on my to-do list.
the rest of the civilized world who's seen Sherlock. I'm not going to put any spoilers in here about the first episode of the current series, but if you look at Sherlock through the lens that the new BBC series has for him, and then you look at like the changing role of Mary Watson, and you look at the way they've done it, they have taken these archetypes and they have slowly metamorphosized each of those archetypes into something else by adding different conflicts and character elements to them.
Oh yeah,
they're
significantly
foundation.
deeper.
Yeah.
They're significantly deeper, but fundamentally, like especially like when you think of these, I think of these not for your characters, but for your NPCs, because these are there to add color to the world. And I sometimes think that we get too busy trying to have too many characters that functionally fulfill the same role. And I think what this does is if you have this laid out in front of you and you say, I know that this NPC is there to be the magician or the sage or whichever role they're there to be, that means that you sort of, it prevents you from having the same style of roles over and over and over again.
It gives you sort of a forced complexity and diversity in your NPCs that you may not consider on your own. So when you have this kind of as a guide, then you're thinking, okay, well maybe I should try and incorporate this character type as well. So if you're only presenting one or two options in your NPCs and maybe you haven't realized it, prompt you to sort of branch
now something
out
else
from
that I thought
task.
about was that you could have this. I like the idea also the number of 12, because if you look at a lot of stories, and except unless you're George Martin, you only have so many characters, right? Now I love the Martin books, but there are a tremendous amount of characters in there, right? And it gets a little confusing at times. But
there has to be, considering the attrition rate.
Well, that's true too. But it's also a very big world. But if you look at like the Lord of the Rings series, there's not that many real characters in it that are important, like largely important to the story. With that, if you plug each of those characters into these kind of archetypes, right? Now, a character might be the caretaker to me, but could also be the lover to Kurt's character, right? So you could have the same characters. Now it adds almost another level of complexity in how they react to different characters and what their own motivations are towards the individual PCs.
Now, here's a question. So suppose you're writing your plot, you have a 6 to 12 episode story arc. How many of these are good to include? I mean, obviously, you're not going to put all 12 in every single story.
And I don't think.
I mean, am I shooting for a number here, or
I don't know. I think it's whatever fits because it's fluid. Because if you're playing a Firefly game, for example, right? I don't think you need to put the rebel in there because you're all rebels. If you're playing Firefly, you're all rebels. What you definitely need is you need the sovereigns and the citizens and those kind of things, to be there to show what the world is and what the crushing mundanity of what are they called?
What do you mean? You mean the Alliance?
Yeah. So they're there to show what the Alliance represents and
Glorian purple bellies. That's what they're called.
You forgot what they were called.
So
I just want to let the audience know I'm judging right now.
Without the in every story, you don't need to have every archetype there. I think it gets a little busy if you do that. But I think if you have these in mind specifically as you lay out your plots and as we go on into the hero's journey, I feel like these archetypes play an even more important role in the hero's journey, which is really ultimately what we're trying to get.
Like looking at this archetype thing, I see a lot of just like general like personality traits, but I don't see a lot of them that represent your really just evil for the sake of evil character. Does that make sense? Well,
the evil is the shadow. That's what they...
So when you're talking about NPCs, though, like you're trying to create the people that you're battling, right? So what about your just... okay, so from Game of Thrones, let's say we're talking about the Hound.
Mm-hmm.
Not, before he picks up Arya and develops some sort of pseudo-conscience.
Right.
Like what archetype would you say that he is? because I don't feel like he seems to fit any of them. Prove me wrong, please. It's an
I
open
can't.
invitation.
I don't think that the archetypes are a solid basis for a character. I think it's important to know about them so that you can make your NPCs more believable in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think he fits any of those initially.
No, but also I think that those books specifically are kind of different because they write them like, I don't know. They'll leave this.
He is a common type of character. Like the Hound's role is common on the evil side of things.
This isn't a comprehensive list of,
he's
of archetypes either.
Darth Vader.
Young
the
said
Hound
that
is
there
Darth
were,
Vader.
Young said that there were a potentially infinite number of archetypes. I mean, just
Although
because
Darth Vader
we
could
haven't
maybe
covered
be a
the kind of
magician,
archetype.
but I
No,
don't
Darth
think
Vader. Darth
would
Vader is the
classify.
shadow in the first in like, which is not on here, but the shadow, which when we get into the actual monomyth, the shadow is the bad guy.
No, the Emperor. It would be the shadow then.
It's a little
Not Darth
kind
Vader.
of no. He's still a bad guy.
He's like lackey numero uno. He's the right hand man, as is the Hound.
No, the Darth Vader the Emperor doesn't actually show up until
Loyal bodyguard. That's what I would
Right,
call
but
the Hound.
he's the shadow in the darkness. That's why he's the shadow. He's the Emperor. You don't see
No,
him
but he
in
doesn't.
in the
He's not
beginning.
presented in the movies until the third movie.
Right, because he's the shadow.
So, but until that point, Vader is the shadow.
Okay, so the point being, though, hold on a second.
So it doesn't
I'm,
just.
I'm
I mean, you know,
pulling the
but
brakes onto this because I think what the argument here is, I think it's pretty solid, is if you don't have, I don't want to say you don't have a lot of experience, but if you are looking for something else to help inform your world of NPCs, going with some of these 12 basic archetypes that we have a list of in front of us isn't a bad idea as a way to go, okay, what general sort of slot do these people fall into? And if it's not on there, it's not a big deal.
No, you don't. Yeah.
The point that I'm making then
This
is
isn't for
that,
bad guys, though.
Right. This would be for creating your NPCs that are aiding your heroes in some way. This isn't
It's a good
as
guy
useful when creating your NPCs.
Or you could
that
go so
are
far as to say that they're
antagonists.
being even obstructive, but not the bad guy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like you could very easily have people that fit these archetypes that are maybe working parallel to the characters, or even against them in some kind of way, but they're not the bad guy of the story.
Okay.
The shadow is the repressed consciousness, the things that everybody thinks but doesn't act on, while the bad guys are the ones that act on them.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody that acts on those things that they probably shouldn't and they know they shouldn't, they're the bad guy.
And I think there's probably just like you've got your 12 virtuous sort of characters here, there's probably 12 evil characters. You've got like the Sauron, the great brooding evil. You've got the chief henchman to the great brooding evil. You've got minions that roll out and do little petty evils, and there's the people who've been corrupted who used to be good. And I'm sure there's a whole set of them, but I think just by taking this list, turning it on its head and saying, okay, so what's the opposite of a citizen? A minion, just one of the nameless slave workers in the pits of wherever. The sovereign is the Sauron sort of
Right. The sovereign kind of stays the same, except he just becomes wicked.
He just becomes evil.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like there are some that do both easier than others. You know what I mean? Like the sovereign is easy to change the motivation there because it's just all about order and stability, and whereas maybe the innocent isn't quite so easy to flip to the evil side, and some of them just go better one way than the other.
Well, I also don't think that every single one of them have to have a reflection, like a mirror, like an evil mirror reflection of them. Some of them just don't suit it.
Cool,
it could be
in a game.
Yeah, it could be. I agree. It would be interesting. Some of them would be a little more challenging than others. Also, I think it's hard sometimes to make compelling bad guys like that is just so, like if you take the innocent example and you want the mirror reflection of the innocent, which is going to be just the complete wicked, evil, soulless bad guy, those ones are very rarely compelling as bad guys. Like they're the bad guy that does bad for the sake of bad, and well, whatever, we finally meet him and we probably kill him, and then that's not a compelling.
But just how much do your heroes usually know about your bad guys' histories?
Oh, well, that's a great point. But I think if you're just wicked for the sake of wickedness, then the backstory is I had a tortured upbringing. I'm a bad guy now, and I'm just the epitome of evil, and I need to be put down.
Times.
Yeah, so but I don't find, like, not that you can't use that, but like I don't find that as compelling of a story as saying using a I don't know, almost any other of the archetypes and twisting them a little bit, because evil for the sake of evil just isn't compelling at a story level other than just going there and killing it.
And I just realized the story's already been done. It's called Dark Crystal. And
Right, that's a
I
great
was
movie.
like, oh gosh, I know I've heard the story before.
Right. That movie used to scare the crap out of me when I was little. I don't know why. The guys were weird.
So when you're talking about your evolution of NPCs, where you're maybe wanting them to change roles and actually develop some complexity in your story, like you're talking about with the Sherlock thing, do you think you just let that develop entirely organically with the story, or do you start and say, okay, well, I'm making this NPC, I'm going to start out with the NPC as the lover, and then maybe they're going to evolve into, the rebel or whatever.
I totally
do
think-
you set that out the gate, or do you just let that evolve
I
completely
think
organically?
it's both, because sometimes when you build a story, you know that this is the guy who's going to start off your buddy, but he's going to betray you because that's how the story goes, right? At the same time, sometimes through gameplay, things just develop organically. Good rolls, bad rolls, you make a great role-playing moment, whatever it is, and sometimes, next thing you know, what was your lover, hell hath no fury, like the scorn of a woman's scorn, they slide very easily into other roles organically sometimes. Now, you might build that into it, but if it happens organically, I think it works almost even better.
No,
Nothing is worse than forced betrayal.
No, and that's my thing is, I keep saying it is, wherever I start from, it's a point of departure. Okay, if you start off with somebody who's your ally and you give them the shaft, they will take that shaft and sharpen it and try to stab you back.
That's just tracking what happens through doing good bookkeeping, I guess you might say, on the storyline of the game and what people do and how they interact with the world and how the world then reacts to them, essentially. So.
Okay, so then my other question is, let's say you have all these NPCs kind of created out the gate, and I've done these archetypes, and that's where I started with my NPCs. Sometimes when you're playing, you've got your game running, you have your PCs involved, and you notice that maybe one of my PCs is suddenly filling the role of the sage for the party, or
those
what
are
have
good
you.
PCs.
Yes. So
I
somebody's
agree.
got a good PC. So do I just cut that NPC out
I
and
don't
be
know
like,
that
well,
you
that role
cut them
is
out.
filled?
I think you let them fade back so that they might still be mentioned, but they're kind of in the background. Think of like Radagast. Radagast is kind of there a little bit, but not really. He's kind of half crazy anyway. Nobody really knows.
I say cut them loose. If there's a PC that's doing it, boom, they're gone. They're gonna get in a car accident or
but
something.
I don't think that you need to destroy them or eliminate them from the game. I just think that you may let them take a back seat to the role of the player.
I actually think these archetypes might make a better basis for PCs.
I agree.
NPCs.
Well, it's sort of like that in a non-traditional like D&D setting. I agree, because
Hold on.
look at all your good shows. Look at Firefly. They all fulfill specific roles, and there's no duplicates. Every show. And we'll go into this more in the monomyth when you get into your hero, your ally, your trickster, your shadow, your shapeshifter, all this kind of stuff. Everybody fills very specific roles for the purpose of the story. And that's I know this is kind of rambling a little bit, but the idea of these archetypes ties very closely into the monomyth. And without going through these, I think it makes it really hard to kind of grasp some of the concepts of the monomyth.
All right.
Mal, for example, is not the hero that we have listed
Mal.
here. He's the rebel.
Who's Mao?
Mal Reynolds.
Malcolm
Oh,
Reynolds.
Mao. I thought you said Mao, like Chairman Mao. I was like,
What?
Mao who? What? So my bad.
No.
No, yeah, absolutely. He they all kind of fill the rebel role to a one degree or another, but Mao like kind of epitomizes it, right?
He's also, I don't know, I would say he's more of a rebel when the war is actually going on. He's almost more of an explorer otherwise. Because what does that say? Independence, testing limits, bravery, nonconformity.
Leadership.
Yeah.
Leadership.
Well, then you
He's
have
a leader of men.
like the shepherd is very clearly the sage. Kaylee would be the innocent. Because she's always has this just sort of
I
air
thought
of.
River was the innocent.
She could feel like she ties into it as well, but like the childhood.
She has no concept of it.
Yeah, the childhood innocence of that she runs around and does things even before River, really plays a large role in some of the storylines. She's always sort of bouncing around the ships and doing things. How she kind of sits back in the episode with the dress leaned up against the wall, like sitting back happily, like just admiring this,
Fufra, I
Yeah.
believe was the term for those who don't remember.
What else do we have on there? Along with the Firefly thing, what do you think about the Doctor would be the caregiver? Who else are we missing? Zoe, or would she fit in on there?
Zoe is the hero.
No, I mean, no, seriously, that is the role that she pretty much plays. I mean, granted, in the story she's married to Wash, but if she wasn't, the story doesn't change significantly.
No, I agree.
And so that's the fact that she is interchangeable as a character in that sense. She's definitely the hero.
Well, and the other thing is throughout some of the episodes, this is
Could
one
be
of the
the
things
Sovereign.
kind of we were talking about is the kind of things move back and forth. You can even consider Mal the Sovereign because he owns the ship and he's sort of the king of the ship in a way, the captain. Wash is the jester very, very clearly. Jane sometimes is the jester as well. They kind of, depending on how incompetent and stupid he wants to be portrayed.
Jane is the hero.
He is the hero called Jane.
That's right.
But there's like these
He
fit
did rob
into
from the rich and gave to the poor.
these fit into so many stories, and I agree with Lee. It very
Jane
much
is
ties
clearly the
into
magician.
it very much ties into the character, maybe not character party archetype with like classes or whatever, but definitely ties into like the role that people are going to fill in the party. Now, in a D&D sense, the magician kind of does itself. It's a wizard.
He's a smelly wizard.
Right, exactly.
But
And
I don't think the fact that you're a wizard necessarily dictates that you're going to be that particular archetype.
Oh,
No.
I think it does.
No, well, I mean, you could be a wizard that is also a caregiver. I mean, maybe
Right,
your
you can
emphasis
kind
is
of
on
fill
healing
more.
and compassion for the little people.
that's
I
called
mean,
a cleric.
Right? Star Wars had Obi-Wan, magician, smelly wizard. Harry Potter has Dumbledore, magician, smelly wizard. Lord of the Rings has Gandalf, magician, smelly wizard.
But the thing with
Dumbledore looked very clean to me.
the thing about the
Those
magician
others,
though is
maybe. I mean, they're a little dirty, sure, but smelly wizard is a little harsh for Dumbledore.
the magicians are also supposed to have this thing where they have this sacred knowledge that nobody else has, or some kind of training or knowledge they're supposed to bestow, or some kind of an item that there's that is supposed to kind of
elevates them,
set people in motion to be able to fight and bring order to the world that they're fighting against. So now,
Well, as a sage, though, like the magician
Well,
comes
they
with a certain
feel
amount of
they're both-
unknown, unknowableness.
right, but they are both
I just
very
invented that word, but
they are
you know
very
what
closely
you get
related.
what I'm saying, right?
Unknowableness is now a word, by the way. You heard it on the internet. It's real.
they feel a very they are almost interchangeable.
There's a
They
certain
might be
amount
the
of
two closest.
mystery involved with the magician that maybe not with the sage.
Right. Well, I think you could have the same thing with the sage as well, though, if they're non-mystical, like the Dalai Lama is sitting on his mountain meditating, or whatever wise man you have. Doesn't necessarily have to have-
Elrond is the sage.
Yes.
Gandalf is the smelly wizard.
Yeah. Okay, I would agree with that. Yeah. Yeah.
Right on.
But it's because Gandalf comes with a certain amount of unpredictability that you don't get with Elrond.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, okay, so the Dalai Lama, you may not understand him, but he's fairly predictable. He's going to sit there, he's going to think about things, and he's not really going to do anything that's super exciting and unexpected, right?
Right.
Like the magician, on the other hand, has a few tricks up his sleeve,
Well,
if you will.
that's part of built into it in like the idea of magic being chaos and creation and all this. It's like kind of built into that kind of a thing as well. The way stories have been, told and kind of built them up. So it makes sense that way. So do you think that this is a good place to kind of start when you start to build a story, to sort of plug characters in broadly sometimes for the ultimate role they're going to fill, not necessarily like their ultimate motivations, because it's what I think is nice is to have conflicting motivations and then have them filling certain roles. Black Sails is a great show that does this. They have characters that represent the caregiver, but they have crazy competing motivations, and they're not really loyal to anybody but themselves, but they fill this role of taking care of Nassau and the island as a whole, and it kind of creates this interesting conflict inside the characters and how they interact with the world and the other characters as well.
I would say this is a good consideration and a good starting point. But when you're creating your NPCs using this, I would keep in mind potential NPC evolution and kind of use this as, like I said, like a starting point, but add some more depth to it.
Oh yeah, I don't think this is like the end all be all. This is all they're going to be.
All right,
but
I have to admit to a certain level of ambivalence about it, for the simple fact that once you start dropping characters into clearly identifiable slots, they become clearly identifiable.
But that's how
Cliche.
stories.
Hold
But
on,
that's how
hold
stories
on,
are.
hold on,
Cliche, you
wait,
might
hold
say.
on. Hold on. It is a tool in the toolbox. I would say anytime you start enforcing a overarching structure that, oh yeah, if you try hard enough, you can massage anything into this. But with anything having to do with first half of the 20th century psychology, I take it with a grain of salt that is the size of my head, which is not insignificant, by the way, at least in cubic capacity.
But the hero's journey, where this kind of ties back to stories like Odysseus and Jason and the Argonauts, all the way back through all of those.
That's great, but somebody sat down and actually wrote that plot beginning to end and controlled every point of the narrative.
Right, I get that, but what I'm saying is that those are the stories that we like to see and tell, and that like using this and keeping that in mind, can you build bigger, better, greater, grander stories, knowing that that's the basic framework that we want our stories to be told on? What I'm saying is this is the scaffolding for what you build your building around.
No, this is a scaffolding around which you could build your building around.
But fundamentally, whenever you tell a story, that's what all characters fit into a certain role. That's all of our stories are very much the same.
Yeah,
they do call it role playing.
Whether you use these Jungian archetypes for glibness aside, and you yourself have said there could be an infinite number of archetypes, which in essence,
well, he said that, not us. He said that.
No, I'm just saying though. But if you're using that as a basis, that in essence, in some ways, renders it useless, because if there's an infinite number of options, then you simply have an infinite number of options, and that's fine. I'm just saying this can be a tool, but to be perfectly honest, and your people are going to lambaste me. I've never used these archetypes.
Well, I don't think I have either.
This is
I don't think I have either. What I'm saying,
explorer.
What I'm saying though is I don't think I have consciously either. But we all of our stories are built around these archetypes of monomyth, right? And I think that sometimes subconsciously we're doing this and putting them in there because we're informed by the stories we watch and tell, like Lord of the Rings and The Matrix and all these stories, right? And that's what informs our role playing in the stories that we tell. So knowing that, could you build, like knowing what the framework is, could you build a better, stronger story because you know the framework now and you're not just sort of doing it because that's the stories we listen to, not doing it because I know that that's how the framework of it works.
So as a relatively new GM, I think probably the newest GM at the table, I do think it's helpful because it presents different ways for you to challenge your PCs that you may not have previously considered.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that.
So that's just kind of where I'm.
Well, that's the other thing. Is something else that provoked me to think about it was this. That's also where I came from is because I found that as you tell stories, everybody has their common threads and their ruts they fall into, and that by seeing this laid out in front of you, laid bare, this is the bare bones of all these stories. This is how they're built. Am I including these aspects in my games? Yes or no? And if I am not, does it make my games more compelling for my players now because I'm using tools that I didn't normally use before?
No, fair enough. Like I said, I'm just putting a little counterpoint on it that, the more that you use templates, the more you use templates and the more they become obvious. So just be careful not to use.
I don't disagree with that, but I don't know. Go ahead.
It's good to inform your games, but don't just copy paste.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. I agree because it becomes boring and cliche, like you said. But the thing is that we like boring and cliche to one point or another. We've been like, if you look at the comparisons between some of the movies that we continually absorb and watch, the superhero story is the same story every time, and
but
yet
it's not boring.
We just blow loads of money on it because and I'm guilty of it too. I love them, but they're all the same hero's entrance journey of I'm a superhero. Here's my powers. I'm badass. I beat the bad guy.
Yay.
Okay, so I would probably, personally looking at it saying the importance of the character as an NPC is directly proportional to how archetypal they are. The more important they are, the less archetypal they should be. So if you've got an NPC who's just a throwaway rebel who's wielding a sword and
so Gandalf isn't important then because he is the definition of the wizard.
Hold on a sec, you're in the.
Wait, okay. I think maybe you're kind of putting a negative spin on it, but I agree with what you're saying. But maybe what you're saying is if you're creating a minor NPC, then it's okay to use kind of a straight stereotypical archetype. Whereas if you're building an NPC that's more important, you need to add to them a layer of complexity, deeper motivations, and perhaps some goals for evolution that you're not adding to your simple NPCs. So I agree with what you're saying, but maybe you're just kind of coming at it from an angry
Well, I think
angle.
it's, we're kind of oversimplifying it and trying to pigeonhole them into one specific thing. Like that's all you can do. But like,
Maybe we should talk about games that have that system ingrained in it.
like
The Old World of Darkness has the archetypes in the book, and that's how you regain your willpower as a PC.
oh, through your nature. That's true. So like, for those of you that don't know, aren't familiar with classic World of Darkness, is that it uses. You have some kind of adjective that goes along with defines how the nature of your character, your true self. So it might be curmudgeon or barbarian or bon vivant or whatever it is. And when
I'm
you
sorry, could you say that again?
bon vivant,
Thank
and when you enact that nature, you are rewarded by getting willpower back. And I think that's a great example of it, of where they're kind of incorporated into the character. And I would think that some of the deepest characters that I've seen have come from World of Darkness games, but I think that's because it's very closely tied to the real world, so it helps you identify with those characters. And it's a game of personal tragedy.
I actually don't like the World of Darkness archetypes at all.
I don't use them a whole lot. I think they're kind of
I
tough,
find
but
that they pigeonhole
said
my
you love
character.
them.
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
Well, I
whoa,
do-
Hey, I'm talking here. I find that they kind of pigeonhole my character, and I feel like kind of evolve a little bit as the game is going on, and
Right.
I think less and less about that archetype, and really I don't end up giving it as much thought. I do like the incorporation of the virtue and the vice.
That's a
I
new
feel
World
like
of
I
Darkness.
rely on that more.
Me too.
But the archetype I don't really appreciate
What
as
I-
much for a PC.
What I don't like about it is they have nature and demeanor. Nature is your true self. Demeanor is who you present yourself to, how you present yourself to the world. And I don't like demeanor because I think you're different people. You are a different self to different people. I'm not the same person at work that I am the same person here, right?
I think that the roads in Old World of Darkness had more to do with who my character was as a person.
Oh, it's a kind of a
like
guiding
the road
ethic
of
and morality.
Kings is definitely someone that meets the sovereign archetype, whether or not that's the archetype I picked to regain willpower for the character.
Right. It's the kind of the how you go about engaging with the world and your moral compass.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Are there any other games that you can think of that directly use archetypes as a piece of the character?
Kurt mentioned Space 1889, and Shadowrun.
Shadowrun, I think you were talking about.
First edition Shadowrun, definitely. I kind of fell off from Shadowrun after that. Space 1889 definitely had PC archetypes in it. I mean, they gave you examples of characters that you could literally plug and play.
Right.
I always saw them as jumping off points. I don't particularly care for them in the fact that they're basically generic pre-gens. And if there's anything that some people hate worse than pre-gens, it's generic pre-gens. And I always saw the character, either PC or NPC, as driven by whatever the primary motivation is for that particular character. These are other archetypes and things you can throw in on top of that might do well.
But couldn't
as a
you also say
description.
that the archetype is the primary motivation of the character as well, though? Because if you're
I
a
wouldn't
sovereign,
agree with that at all.
if you're a sovereign, like you know, like one of your motivation implied in being the sovereign is to rule over your kingdom. Whether you're a good ruler or a bad ruler remains to be seen. But or if you're the caregiver, your role in the party would be to take care of everyone, the healer, the cleric kind of a role.
And this is where I depart from this completely, and I mean absolutely not going to change my mind on this one, is that you can fit these archetypes over them to describe their role in the story, but a character is primarily defined to me by what their motivation is.
Well, I don't disagree. That's what I'm saying. Like their role in that's all I'm saying is that it's not their like who they. It doesn't define who they are. It kind of like is a blanket that lays over them that says this is the sort of, without getting into minutia of the story, the overlaying thing of what I'm supposed to be doing in the story. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's not specified as an archetype or laid out in this exact format, but Apocalypse World uses basic archetypes as
essentially.
well. I mean, you get basically a pre-made character with some specificity that you add, and you have
very much your heart holder, your
right,
gun
exactly.
bunny, your gun lugger, rather not gun bunny,
Battle Babe.
the brain, the angel. They actually almost do exactly fit in there because I didn't even think about that. Very interesting. I wonder if the same is true with like the other hacks though, with Monster Hearts and
Yeah, I think so.
do you think so?
I would say what is interesting about those Apocalypse World games is, you don't have that same depth of character, but it's designed to be kind of, I create this quick and I may
It's kinda
die in a
punchy,
moment
yeah.
sort of thing.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's more straight to game and less thought involved.
Well, I agree. And the stories in the Apocalypse World don't seem to be designed initially to be as deep, I guess you might say. Now, if you played it over a long period of time, I think it very easily could be. And not to say that you couldn't develop more deep plots. And with some of the other hacks that have come out for Apocalypse World, I feel like they're sort of better designed to have a deeper plot built into them with some of the additional systems that they've added into it. Like, for instance, Urban Shadows is designed to be a very political game. You have this this kind of waxing and waning of the influence you have over the different 4 factions, day, night, and all this kind of stuff. Whereas Apocalypse World doesn't have that. It's sort of like the difference between Fury Road, Mad Max, and say like the depth of the politics just trying to be put out there in like Underworld or something like that.
And I would really even argue that the things that kind of we find irksome about the archetypes are what make it so ideal for the Apocalypse World setting, in that they are very stereotypical. So okay, this is the character I'm playing, and that is the exact role I'm going to be fulfilling in this game. And so it kind of gives you permission to completely commit to whatever stereotypical role is.
Go 10 miles past where you need to be. Right. It's also interesting because, like, a lot of times as time goes by with those archetypes, or not with the archetypes, with the skins you have in Apocalypse World, if you play long enough, they specifically talk about once you have enough advances, you can actually just change to a different skin. So it might be an interesting example of going from being like an angel, where you're truly the caretaker archetype, and changing and becoming like a heart holder or a gun lugger or whatever it is, and becoming something entirely different, and the potential that exists there for I don't know, like I want to say like the complexity of the character development from going from one extreme to the other. Is there anything else besides the Apocalypse World hacks?
The pre-made characters in All Flesh Must Be Eaten are presented as archetypes.
So do you, along those ways, because like in All Flesh and all the Unisystem games, they used, and a lot of other games use background packages. So do you think that like a background package is built around an archetype then almost?
Yeah, I do.
Usually, yeah, and you can see like in your old D&D when they're presenting the standard NPC
fighter,
character, right? The
Elven
Dwarven
Ranger.
fighter,
Right.
and all of those you can see those archetypes very strongly when they're saying,
Well, those-
here's generic NPC X.
Right.
you
Those
know?
like the characters out of the box for the D&D games, they're very much fall in line with the tropes that everybody expects. Do you know what I mean? Like you said, Elven Ranger, Dwarven fighter, all that kind of stuff. So I think those are just guaranteed tropes that's supposed to be in there. So all right, well, do you guys have anything else to add about this? I don't know. I mean, like, I think that it's something that's kind of implied in a lot of gaming, like the background packages and the way a lot of character creation is kind of initially set up to kind of do that out the gate, but then you can kind of depart and go wherever you need to from there. But yeah, so I don't know.
I think we've hashed
Kind
it
of
out
exhausted
as
as
far
much
as
as we
it's gonna
can.
go.
So if let us know your guys' opinion. You can drop them in the comments below on the episode, or hit us up on Twitter or Facebook and let us know what you think, whether you agree or disagree, or think we have no clue what we're talking about, or whatever. So yeah. So next week, this should kind of lead us into our kind of the telling of the monomyth and how these kind of archetypes relate to that story. So this is kind of a lead into that, which is really where we're trying to get to. So until then, I guess we will talk to you guys next week or Friday.
See you later.
Toodles.
And Lee talking to the microphone today.
Yay.
Thanks for listening. This has been another episode of Just One More Fix. Music has been provided by Kevin MacLeod. You can find him at incompetech.com. You can find us at justonemorefix.com and follow us on Twitter at JustOneMoreFix.